Carol of the Bells. It is one of most famous Christmas songs in the world. It can be heard in TV shows, South Park, The Simpsons, Family Guy, The Mentalist, and others. Carol of the Bells can also be heard in famous movies, Harry Potter, Home Alone, Die Hard 2, The Addams Family. In 1936, an American of Ukrainian descent, Peter Wilgowski, composed an English-language version of the words of Shchedryk, from Ukrainian, blessings, generosity. The song became known as a Carol of the Bells, but the text was very different from the original Ukrainian version. The original version was created in Ukraine by composer Mykola Leontovich. He worked with folk songs, and the basis of his melody was an ancient song from the times of Kiev Rus. At that time, the New Year was celebrated in March, so the text of Shchedryk contains reference to the swallow, which is not associated with the winter season. In the 1920s, Ukraine declared its independence from Russia and tried to strengthen its position. Russian Bolshevik troops tried to conquer Ukraine, destroying the intelligentsia, the creative elite, and all the unconquered on their way. Later, thousands of Ukrainian freethinkers would be imprisoned in Gulag and later executed, and a wave of artificially created famine would sweep through the cities and villages of Ukraine. Nevertheless, in 1919, Ukraine took steps toward global integration and cultural diplomacy. Thus, in 1919, with the assistance of Simon Petlura, a chapel was created to tour abroad to counter Russian propaganda and popularize Ukrainian culture. It would later be called the first project of Ukrainian cultural diplomacy. The conductor also included Shchedryk in the tour repertoire. In March 1919, the Directorate sent the Ukrainian Republican Chapel, led by conductor Alexander Koshets, on a foreign tour, with Leontovich works prominently featured in its repertoire. Simon Petlura believed that familiarizing Europeans with the Ukrainian culture would strengthen Ukrainian position in the peace talk in Paris. Situation kind of reminds me of what is going on right now. Ukrainians try to do the Ukrainian diplomacy, so people know what's the difference from Ukraine and Russia, what is going on, why we are different countries. Well, throughout the year, the chapel performed with great success in Czechoslovakia, Austria, Switzerland, France, Belgium, and other countries. In particular, at a concert in Madrid in November 1921, Ukrainian songs were performed by the Spanish Queen Victoria Eugenia and several Bavarian princes and princesses. In September 1922, the Ukrainian national tour, led by Koshets, went on tour to America. Leontovich could well have witnessed the worldwide triumph of his masterpiece. However, in the early morning hours of January 23, 1921, his life was cut short by a bullet fired from the rifle of the Chekist Afanasy Hrishchenko. The composer was only 43 years old at that time. On January 13, 1921, Mykola Leontovich went to visit his father, who lived in the village of Markivka, and Mykola Dmitrich never returned to Tulchin. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, when classified documents became available, researchers found information in their archives that Leontovich's killer was a Cheka agent. Mykola Leontovich was the son of a priest. He came to visit his father. That very evening, a wagon pulled into the yard. Two men knocked on the door, asking to spend the night. One of them, according to Yastrubetsky, a young blond man, introduced himself as an informant of the guys in Cheka, Afanasy Hrishchenko. In fact, a branch of the KGB that controlled Ukrainians. He told him that he was engaged in the fight against bandits, in fact, peasants who rebelled against the Bolsheviks. At that time, on the orders of the Bolsheviks, wealthy peasants were being deprived of their land and properties, forcibly forced to join collective farms, and worked only for their food, to work for the Bolshevik government. This is what the Cheka was doing. Also, my grandmother, her family was deprived by Bolsheviks, so It's common for Ukrainians. Also, a few years later, the Bolsheviks would ban any possibility of Soviet people to travel abroad. In 1921, a musician who was planning a trip abroad and whose music was gained worldwide popularity stood in the way of the Bolshevik authorities. At 7:30 a.m., a shot was fired that took the life of the Ukrainian composer. Shortly before that, at one of his last concerts, Leontovich had forgotten his suitcase with documents, and when he remembered it, it turned out that someone had been rummaging through it. The briefcase contained tickets for traveling abroad, and the Bolsheviks did not want to allow this. In Soviet times, Leontovich murders was presented as a domestic murder, but information about the killer's occupation, the fact that the killer had received a large sum of money from the Cheka, and some other details clearly indicate political motives for the crime. In 1918, cultural figures began to be killed in Ukraine. For example, in 1918 in Poltava, in the middle of the street, in front of his son, the poet and former Secretary General of Education of the Ukrainian People's Republic, Mykola Leontovich, was killed by a point-blank shot. Later, it would become known that the murder was organized by the counter underground Bolshevik organization. A year before Leontovich's death, on January 6, 1920, a scientist breeder, Lev Simerenko, after whom a popular apple variety was named, was shot dead in the Cherkasy region. The killer escaped, and the authorities did not search for him. In addition to his scientific work, Simerenko was a well-known Ukrainophile and public figure. His younger brothers were killed in Kiev earlier. In the same year, 1919, the former commissioner of the provisional government, Valerian Boshkovsky, was killed in Vinnytsia, and the former commissioner of education, Yukhim Shchedryk, was shot dead. The artificial famine created by the Russian Bolsheviks in the 21st, 22nd years of 20th century, mass resentment and the extermination of the Ukrainian intelligentsia, which would become known as the Executed Renaissance, were approaching. During the Soviet year, most of Leontovich's musical compositions were banned by the Soviet authorities. Today, Russia is once again attacking Ukraine and Ukrainian culture. The first thing that the Russian occupation authorities doing in the occupied territory is destroy Ukrainian books and introduce the Russian language. When people today ask why Ukrainians are so actively opposed to Russia's invasion, the answer is simple. Russia has done too much evil in Ukraine throughout history, trying to destroy history, culture, memory. I'm really glad that Shchedryk's melody was not destroyed and it is still enjoyed around the world a century later, proclaiming the joy and hope of the Christmas holidays.